Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
It's something we see all the time, whether we think about it or not. And it's probably a part that isn't really thought about in the planning of a service. Yet it is something that is very often, when done poorly, quite a eyesore. And that is PowerPoint and PowerPoint design. So Joe is going to talk us through some tips and tricks on just how to make it a little bit easier, to make it a little bit better, so that they are not glaringly frustrating, as they very much often are for me. So, Joe, over to your wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about design previously. I think we focus more on sort of posters and flyers. So I'm going to try and keep this really practical and really focused on PowerPoints today. So I'm going to go straight in. And the first one is have a minimum font size. Now, I can't give you an exact font size of what this is going to be because it's going to vary on every church, depending on your screen size, depending on the size of the room. But have a minimum size, because if the text is too small, people can't read it. Like, you shouldn't even have to be saying this, right? It's so glaringly obvious, but it happens all the time and people can't see it. And in line with that, just don't overload information on the slide. If that's the only thing, like literally, if you stop the podcast now and take nothing else away, then hopefully already those sort of slightly dodgy designs will be looking better. Or perhaps you're at this point thinking, yeah, that's a good point. I might forward this podcast onto my pastor. Like, no judgment. Okay, so font size, that's a big one. And in terms of branding as well, we don't need to overdo it. So this is, I think, tied in with things like the font size, things like the amount of content, because if you have a massive church logo on every slide, then you're going to have to shrink down everything else so that all of your content fits on that slide.
Yeah.
Now, it's nice to have a bit of branding, whether that is your church logo or whether it's a sort of logo or something from the sermon series that you're going through, but it doesn't need to be too much. You could have it just in the bottom corner. You know, your slides before or after the service, you're probably going to have the church name or logo. You're probably going to have the website, but you don't need to have it on every slide throughout the service.
Yeah, because presumably, if I'm sat in your church watching your service, listening to your service, I know that we're in so-and-so a church. I don't need to have it emblazoned on the PowerPoint slide.
Yeah. And I said we're going to stay focused on PowerPoints. You know, I'm going slightly away from this, but it's the same thing with social media in that you don't need to have a massive logo on every graphic you put out on social media, because people are seeing it on social media and it will be tied to your account. If it's something on a blog post, then you might reconsider that, because it's something people can then share to their own social media. But yeah, it doesn't need to take over.
Yeah.
So the next thing is background images, and it's really great to use images. They vary it up. They mean that you can have a lot of that sort of nice visual variety without having to add in a load of sort of rainbow fonts and different colors and word art. But if you've got an image with text over the top of it, the text is obviously going to be more difficult to read. So if you are going to use an image as a background, use an overlay, put a color over the top and then make that 80% transparency or something. So you can just see the image peeping through, but there's enough contrast for people to read. And this is especially the case. Like, it will be hard to read for everyone, but for those whose eyesight isn't quite as good, or they have any sort of visual weakness, then it's just going to be really hard. If you're not sure, then it's probably best to err on the side of caution and just have a solid color instead of an image background.
Yeah.
If we're talking about title slides, you know, whether it's just a title of the sermon, or you might just have one heading, maybe a title and a subtitle on the slide, you're probably going to be able to get away with it because the text is going to be that much bigger and bolder that it's going to be easier to read anyway. So it's less of an image. But yeah, for the rest of the slides, not so much. So one way of getting around this is by having, as I said, having the image background with or without an overlay, probably with, on the title slide. But then on all the other slides, having the color, which is the overlay, being completely opaque, but just with a bit of the image at the bottom as like a little, maybe a quarter, a fifth of the slide across the bottom that still shows the image and still shows the branding. And that's enough to tie things together. So it still looks good, but yeah, it doesn't distract from the information that's on there.
Yeah. And it's I suppose it's different if we're thinking about sermon versus songs and singing along with it, if it's sermon, I'm listening to it. It doesn't matter so much if I can't read it all as clearly. But if I'm meant to be singing along and if I don't know the words, I did have it recently where it was, and it's really difficult because churches have got into having video, like gentle sort of, it's either of a river or a beach or some trees or something.
Yeah, motion backgrounds.
Yeah. And they're really lovely. But I had one recently where it was like a snowy tree background. So it was all black and white.
Yeah.
And then the writing was black. And I was like, okay, I can see it. A, because we're quite close. And also I'm young and have reasonably good eyesight.
Yeah.
But actually, it's not always the case for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's, if you're doing something where actually people need to be able to really read it, as you say, just err on the side of caution and just make it as contrasting and as clear as possible.
Yeah. I mean, to play devil's advocate, it's definitely more important in the song. See, like I had the same thing at Christmas where I couldn't sing verse 3 of the carol because it was a snowy background for that verse.
No one knows verse 3 for most carols anyway.
If you are going to have a motion background, and I guess that's something that sort of fitted better into a song projection, when we talked about that in the tools and resources episode.
Yeah.
If you are going to do it, have it really subtle and make sure that there's really good contrast. But yeah, playing devil's advocate, I think it matters almost as much for the sermons, because if you can't read the content and you're saying it's not as important for that content to be read, then don't put it on the slide.
Oh, that's true. That is true. Yeah, good point. I mean, it's a difficult one because sometimes people don't put enough information on. And I do find it difficult when people even have to have a visual cue for your slide, that sometimes that's quite nice. But,
and this is the thing that I think, because we've seen PowerPoint done so badly to the point that it is kind of a bit of a joke, that there has been a move away from it to some extent. And I don't necessarily think that's the right answer, because I know for me, I find it really helpful to have something up there that leads me back. If I get a bit distracted, it reminds me, pulls me back into where we are in the sermon. But yeah, it has to be done well. And it might be that actually, this will vary from preacher to preacher anyway, but actually just having an image and bringing back to that might be helpful, or just having a couple of words that are bigger and link you back into that main point. So something that I'm seeing more of in churches is having a comfort monitor, which, aside from sounding like something to do with going to the toilet, is a screen that the person on stage can see so that they don't have to keep looking behind them the whole time. You will find that even when you have a comfort monitor, it's still a habit that they can't get out of. But the idea is they don't have to look behind them, they can see in front of them. Now, sometimes that will be on the ground, so at floor level in front of the stage, which means that you can sort of naturally glance down to it. Or sometimes it will be on the back wall of the church, or maybe on a balcony, something like that. Either one is fine, because they're generally within the eye line. But obviously, if you're going to have it at the back, then it's further away. And so quite often what I'll then see is that the pastor will look at that comfort monitor and they'll sort of be struggling, and especially if they're doing their Bible reading from the comfort monitor, from the slides, and they can't read it. And I think then it should be fairly obvious that if they can't read what's on their screen, then probably the same is true the other way around, that people who are sitting in a congregation can't see what's on the big screen. Now, okay, the projector screen might be bigger. And actually, when this is the case, the preacher will end up turning around and looking at the screen anyway, and maybe that's part of it. But it's a good habit to get into, of sort of looking at comfort monitor and saying, if it's big enough for me to see on there, on that smaller screen, then it's definitely going to be big enough and easy enough to read for those who are sitting there in the congregation.
Yeah. And I think actually that also adds to what you said earlier about like, don't overload with information. Because that's something that I've seen recently, of them trying to fill the whole, because we can get as much information on the slide, we're going to get as much information. And rather than breaking it up into 3 slides for the reading, where you've got, 2 verses per slide, so that A, it's big enough, but actually you really can kind of absorb it and take it in. Whereas if there's too much in it, you can't read it properly, and you're like, I'm just trying to read it, I can't take it in. Whereas if it's fewer words but bigger, and you feel like you can absorb it a bit better. And I think that's, again, really frustrating. It's annoying for me, and I can read it fairly well. And I think, gosh, what about people who do just struggle to read, or even thinking about people like with dyslexia and stuff, where actually just having a lot of words on a slide can just be very overwhelming and difficult to process. Where if you break it down a bit, easier to process, it's easier to read. And it just sort of feels a lot more, I don't want to say it feels more sacred, but sort of actually if you sort of a few lines.
It's focused.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's definitely the case with songs as well as Bible readings. I think that we can go too far the other way. You don't want to have half a line or just one line on it, because it will be changing so often that'll be distracting. And there is a sense in which being able to see the lines ahead is sometimes helpful.
Yeah.
But it's just being able to make that decision on a per slide basis and say, actually, for this one, it's going to make more sense to split it up. Because the worship software, if you're talking about song projection and you're using that sort of projection software, they will generally break it up for you and have a maximum amount of words or lines per slide. But you can still put in manually, or you can still like suggest a place that a line break goes in there. And I think that just links in for me to the idea of practicing in place. So whether that's looking at your comfort monitor or the screen behind you, whether it's looking at your song words or indeed the PowerPoint presentation, ideally you want to at least as a bare minimum run them once in the church before the service actually starts. But if you're creating templates that are going to be used for weeks, then definitely you want to get in there and test your template, test that it actually works. Because otherwise it's going to be last minute faffing around, or you won't get around to it. It won't be suitable and people won't be able to read the content properly. So yeah, do what you can to prepare it in advance and then actually test it in place. And so we've talked about templates a little bit, and this is as much about good design as it is about freeing up your time and making good use of it. But it's worth having a template for the church that is just a generic one, which you can always go back to.
Yeah.
And then you might also want to have a template per sermon series as well. And that's something that you can do without too much extra effort. It's something which I think we refer to in our sermon series episode back when we spoke about that. You might even be able to use the graphic that you created for the sermon series as the title slide, and then have a similar version of that, but without text on it, as the background for the other slides, obviously with an overlay, as we've said, so you can read the text. You know, it doesn't need to be something. I think when I used to be regularly doing sermon series designs, the PowerPoint maybe took me 5 or 10 minutes to create on top of it. And that was a case of loading in the graphics, adding an overlay, and making sure that the fonts were set up correctly. So it's not a big thing, but it helps not only visually, but it could even just save your preachers some work, because they don't have to think at all about the design of it. Hopefully it means that it's harder for them to actually spoil the design of it as well. Yeah. And, you know, especially when it's preachers who are coming from elsewhere, who are coming to visit, they don't have to think about it. You can give them the template, they can just type in their content, and that's done.
I suppose on that, you can have the handful of sort of like a standard themed one for the next 6 weeks, 2 months, or however long a sermon series is going on for. But on that, you could have like a pre-slide, essentially a first one. I don't want to say like instructions, but effectively a kind of nothing smaller than 12 or no busy backgrounds, and just a few sort of guiding points, so that when you send it to someone, you know, especially if they're a visitor and they don't know that you've got certain things in place, it just gives a bit of a kind of like, have more, just make it easier to read, or sort of, you know, these are the sort of things we try to do just to help our sort of congregational experience. Because again, that just helps guiding rather than getting kind of like, I don't know, a bit poopy about it when they send it over.
It's having those house styles, and it sort of it avoids having to explain something which might potentially be a difficult discussion. So I think with, you know, designing the templates, designing your slides, you keep it simple. As we've sort of alluded to, you keep it simple with the content as well, not having too much on. To be honest, if you're not having too much on a slide, then you're already 99% of the way there. That it's probably going to look better than what most of the other PowerPoints will look like just by doing that. And, you know, following the other things like the branding and having the text big enough, that will mean that you don't have too much on one side, because the text is big enough that you can't have too much, like it won't all fit on. And so you have to, it all leads on to each other.
Yeah.
You know, something else you might have in those house guides, as well as in the template that you create, is the idea that when you have an image, that's it. You just have the image on the screen, you show it full screen, you don't have a border, You don't have a white background, you have black, so that's the only thing that people are seeing on the projector. And it's less of a distraction. You just see that. And I think this idea of just bringing in a little bit of minimalism with the design will be really helpful. I mean, after all, that's the purpose of the PowerPoints is to drive people back to the point that is being spoken from the front. So not to distract, but to re-engage them with that, to keep people's minds focused and just to help it to stick. Yeah, and be a helpful guide to them.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing that links into all of this really, and it's probably a longer term thing because it requires building trust, but you can explore having an agreement with the people in your church that preach that you are able to edit their PowerPoints after they've created them.
Scandalous.
So, exactly. I mean, obviously, we're not talking about making dramatic changes. We're not talking about changing the content because you're the one that will end up looking silly because they're still going to preach what they're going to preach. But having that trust there that you are able to just make things a little bit more concise, and it might need a little bit of back and forth that you say, I'm thinking of changing this, and they go, actually, no, it's really key that we keep that. Fair enough.
Can I change the font?
Yeah. and again, it might be as simple as that. It might be a case of, here's your template for this sermon series. They paste in the content, you get it, and you go, okay, well, they've pasted that, but it's carried in a different font. And so it doesn't look right at all, and you can change it. Now, I do know some people who would get funny about that. And I think it's important to not take it too seriously, but also just say, look, you're great at preaching. This is my job. I'm doing the design here, and I can explain if you want, but the idea of this is to enhance what you're preaching. So it does require that relationship. It does require trust, but it also requires developing a bit of a rhythm in terms of timing, because you're not going to have time to do this and fix things if you're only getting it 5 minutes before the service starts.
No.
And again, that is less about trust, more about respect of saying, can we do this bit in advance? It's always going to be a difficult thing because preachers are generally going to be some of the busiest people in the church, and they're going to be up against it time-wise. But if you can even have a draft of it the night before, that at least gives you some time to make changes. And then you can always still have that last 5 minutes before the service discussion to run those changes by the preacher so that they can sort of see what you've done and obviously not be caught off guard by any changes when they actually come to preach it.
Yeah. And actually kind of thinking about trust and feedback, I suppose, for those making it. Again, I suppose, some people would get funny. I've had it before where I've said, not I don't like that photo, but either actually you've just copied it from Google and, we can get a better picture that's better quality, or actually if we're live streaming, we can't share this picture or sort of thing. And again, it's not because it's not really in house rules as such, but it's sort of being able to feedback of saying, actually, if you think about how big our projector is, that picture's not going to look so good. And obviously you're doing this for God's glory. Why not find better pictures or just, it's just about kind of going, actually, we can make this a little bit better.
Yeah. And it's not just about everything looking amazing, but it is, if you've got those house rules, if you've had that discussion and people can see the thinking that goes into it, then I think it gives you permission to sort of be a little bit more forthright with your feedback, obviously still doing it in the right way, because people can see the thinking behind it. Hopefully these have been some helpful tips. We would appreciate if you send any examples, good or bad, our way. We love to see the good ones. We kind of have a love-hate relationship with the bad ones, and it's quite fun to look at, but also a little bit depressing. So send them to hello@gppodcast.uk and we'll take a look.
Yeah. And if this has been helpful for you, or if you think that this episode or this whole podcast is helpful for either someone in your church leader, or someone else who does church comms within their church, do just share the link to whatever platform that you listen to this from, or you can send them the link of gppodcast.uk and that takes you straight to our website.
Where these days you will find a full transcript of each episode, as well as links to the things that we talked about.
Gourds and Pomegranates is brought to you by Joe Gallant and Hannah Fleming Hill. You can find episode transcripts and contact the show via gppodcast.uk.